In the solemn hush of a nation's farewell, where tradition holds as firm as the stones of London's streets, a royal guard's single act of compassion shattered protocol and stirred hearts across the world. Lance Corporal William Evans, bound by 15 years of unyielding discipline, stepped out of formation during the Queen's funeral procession to honor a promise to a dying servant of the crown. What unfolded was not just a breach of rules, but a profound testament to loyalty, duty, and the quiet power of human connection. A moment that left a grieving nation weeping for the values that endure. This is the story of how one guard's courage redefined honor, weaving a legacy of emotion that resonates far beyond the day. The sky over London hung heavy with clouds, a fitting shroud for the Queen's funeral procession on that September day in 2022. The streets, lined with mourners, were cloaked in a silence so deep it seemed to still the city's pulse. Lance Corporal William Evans stood at his post along the route, his scarlet tunic a vivid contrast to the sea of black. His bearskin cap towered above the crowd, his white-gloved hands gripping his rifle with the precision of a man who'd mastered stillness. At 34, Evans was a veteran of the Queen's Guard, his 15 years of service honing a discipline that made him a living emblem of tradition. Today, his duty was sacred, to stand vigil as the Queen, a monarch who'd defined an era, made her final journey. The procession moved with choreographed grace, the gun carriage bearing the Queen's coffin, draped in the royal standard, the imperial state crown glinting atop, drawn by Royal Navy sailors, an echo of centuries-old ritual. Evans's eyes, trained to scan the crowd for security, moved imperceptibly beneath his cap. His captain, Mason Croft, stood yards away, a 25-year veteran whose name was synonymous with protocol. Croft's gaze was a hawk's, sweeping for any flaw in the guard's formation. To falter under his watch was to invite a reckoning. As the mournful notes of the funeral march grew nearer, Evans's scan caught a figure in the crowd, frail and faltering amidst the press of spectators. Declan Shaw, 82, was a ghost of the man Evans had known, a footman who'd served the Queen for over 6 decades, his life woven into the fabric of the palace. Shaw's silver hair was still neatly combed, his dark suit immaculate, but his thin frame swayed, one hand clutching a barrier, the other pressed to his side in pain. Pancreatic cancer, in its final stages, had robbed him of strength, but not of purpose. He'd come to say goodbye to the Queen, the center of his world. Evans's mind flashed to their first meeting, a decade ago in Buckingham Palace's corridors. A rookie guard, stiff from hours at his post. Evans had caught Shaw's eye. The footman, carrying a tray of tea, had whispered, "Wiggle your toes, lad. Keeps the blood flowing." That small kindness sparked a bond, unlikely but enduring, between the young soldier and the aging servant. Over years, their brief encounters, tea in the staff quarters, chats in quiet corners, revealed Shaw's life, a man who'd served 3 monarchs, who'd never married, who'd called the palace family. He'd spoken of the Queen's compassion, her asking after his ill mother during a crisis, her insistence he take lighter duties as arthritis crept in. "She's the measure of a person," Shaw had said, his eyes distant with loyalty. 2 years prior, at a palace garden party, Shaw had confided his diagnosis, pancreatic. "Not the good kind," he'd said, cherry blossoms falling around them. His voice held no self-pity, only a quiet fear. "When her time comes, I may not be there to say goodbye. The crowds, my condition." He'd looked at Evans, his eyes pleading. "If I'm still here, will you help me pay my respects?" Evans had given his word, a soldier's oath. "I'll make sure you can, Mr. Shaw." Now, as the coffin drew within 50 yards, Shaw's struggle was unbearable to witness. Hemmed in by the crowd, he gasped for breath, his hand trembling on the barrier. The spectators, eyes fixed on the procession, didn't notice the old man's plight. To them, he was invisible, as he'd been for decades, present but unseen, moving silently through palace halls. Evans's duty was absolute: remain motionless, embody the guard's tradition during this hallowed moment. To To break formation was to risk his career, his 15 years of service, his place in the regiment. Croft's fury would be merciless, the disciplinary hearing inevitable. Yet Shaw's face, etched with desperation, pressed on Evans's conscience. The promise he'd made wasn't casual. It was a vow to a man who'd given his life to the same crown Evans served. The coffin was 30 yards away. 20. Evans' breath deepened, his decision crystallizing in the crucible of duty. With the precision of a parade ground drill, he executed an about-face, the movement so flawless it seemed part of the ceremony. Then, defying every rule, he stepped forward, his boots cutting a path through the stunned crowd. The spectators parted, awed by the scarlet figure, moving with purpose. Evans reached Shaw in 7 measured steps, his rifle still perfectly gripped. "Lance Corporal Evans," Shaw whispered, his rheumy eyes wide with shock. Without a word, speech would be another breach. Evans extended his left arm, guiding Shaw forward with the dignity of an escort. He positioned the old man at the front, beside his now vacant post, where the view was unobstructed. Shaw's legs trembled, and Evans adjusted his stance to steady him. A pillar of strength in scarlet. "You kept your promise, lad," Shaw murmured, his voice lost in the funeral march. "She deserved your farewell." "Sir," Evans replied softly, his eyes forward as the coffin passed. For a fleeting moment, they stood together, guard and footman, young and old, as the Queen's coffin rolled by, the crown glinting under the gray sky. Shaw straightened, his hand rising in a shaky salute, decades of service in that single gesture. Then, with the same precision, Evans guided Shaw back to a safe spot among the crowd and returned to his post, his movements a seamless arc of duty. The crowd was silent, their gasps swallowed by reverence. From the corner of his eye, Evans saw Croft's face, confusion morphing into fury, his jaw clenched tight. The other guards held their positions, but tension rippled through their ranks. The procession continued, the coffin moving onward, but the moment lingered, a breach of protocol that felt like an act of grace. Shaw, now supported by respectful bystanders, watched with tearful eyes, his farewell complete. Hours later, when the ceremony ended, Croft approached, his voice icy. "Lance Corporal Evans, report to headquarters immediately. A disciplinary hearing awaits." Evans nodded. "Yes, sir," his face betraying nothing. As he was escorted away, he caught sight of Shaw in the distance, helped into a cab by a nephew. The old man turned, raising a hand in a gesture of gratitude and salute. Evans held his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of a promise kept. At headquarters, Colonel Richard Hargreaves, the regiment's commanding officer, awaited with Croft and 2 senior officers. "At ease, Lance Corporal," Hargreaves said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Explain your actions." Evans recounted his bond with Shaw, the footman's 60 years of service, his terminal illness, and the oath to ensure his farewell. Mr. Shaw had 2 months left. "Sir, today was his last chance to honor the Queen he served," Croft interjected, his voice taut. "You abandoned your post during a state funeral, the most significant event in decades, for a personal matter." Hargreaves raised a hand, silencing him. "You understand the gravity of this breach." "Lance Corporal." "Yes, sire," Evans replied. "I accept full responsibility. I don't regret keeping my promise, but I'll face the consequences." Dismissed to wait, Evans sat in the anteroom, the weight of his choice settling in. An hour later, he was recalled, surprised to see Lady Victoria Hamilton, the royal household's private secretary, now present. "Our records confirm Mr. Shaw served from 1960 to 2020, she said, her voice measured. "He was decorated by Her Majesty 4 times for exceptional service. What's less known is that the Queen, in her funeral instructions, wished for Shaw to attend the private service at Windsor. His health made that impossible." She produced an envelope, handing it to Hargreaves. The colonel read the contents, his expression shifting. "This note, from a senior royal, expresses gratitude for your actions. Lance Corporal, citing the Queen's regard for Shaw, it requests we consider the unique circumstances." Croft's face flickered with disbelief, his rigidity softening. Lady Hamilton left, and the room's atmosphere changed, the weight of royal approval palpable. The next morning, Evans stood before Hargreaves again, Croft at his side. The breach cannot be ignored. Hargreaves began. It risks the discipline that defines the guard. Evans braced for dismissal, but Hargreaves continued. However, your uniform represents more than protocol. It embodies service, loyalty, and respect, values. Her Majesty lived your actions, while a breach honored those values. He stepped forward. You'll forfeit 2 weeks' pay and undertake additional duties for a month. This will be noted in your record. A pause. Then, your choice showed a deeper duty, one that reflects the guard's spirit. Hargreaves handed Evans an envelope, a note of thanks from the royal household, for you and Mr. Shaw. Evans accepted it, his surprise masked by discipline. Thank you, sir. Hargreaves smiled faintly. Captain Croft has some lengthy shifts planned for you. Croft's eyes held a grudging respect, a crack in his iron facade. That afternoon, Evans visited Shaw at his small flat near the palace. The old man, weaker now, lit up at the sight of him. Evans shared the colonel's words and the royal note. Worth it, lad? Shaw asked, his smile faint but warm. Without question, sir, Evans replied, his formality softened by affection. They sat together, the note between them, a shared victory of heart over rule. But the story stretches beyond that day, weaving through lives and years. Shaw's final weeks were peaceful, his farewell to the Queen, a memory he cherished. When he passed, 2 months later, his nephew sent Evans a letter, enclosing a photo from the funeral, Shaw saluting, Evans at his side. He spoke of you until the end. The note read, Evans kept the photo in his barracks, a quiet reminder of why he served. The nation, too, felt the ripple. A bystander's video of Evans' act, shaky but clear, spread online, captioned, The Guard Who Broke Protocol for Honor. It garnered millions of views, sparking debates about duty versus compassion. Letters flooded the palace, praising Evans' humanity. A journalist, moved by the story, interviewed Shaw's nephew, uncovering the footman's life of silent devotion. The piece, published in The Times, became a tribute to unsung servants. With Evans' act as its heart, Evans's career survived, though the incident marked him. His additional duties under Croft were grueling, but he performed them with the same precision he'd shown that day. Croft, over time, softened, once admitting over a pint, "You did what I couldn't." Evans rose to sergeant, his leadership shaped by the lesson that duty sometimes demands bending rules. He trained new guards, not just in protocol, but in the values beneath it. Often citing Shaw's life as an example, the royal note, framed in Evans's home, became a touchstone. Years later, at a regimental dinner, Hargreaves recounted the story to new recruits, calling it the day protocol bowed to honor. Evans, now graying, smiled quietly, his thoughts on Shaw. The photo from the funeral sat on his mantle, beside a medal he'd earned in Afghanistan. A reminder that courage takes many forms. For the public, the story endured as a beacon. Schools taught it in history classes, framing it as a moment when one man's promise reflected a nation's soul. A playwright crafted a drama, The Guard's Oath, which ran in London's West End, with Evans and Shaw as its heart. Audiences wept, not just for the Queen, but for the quiet servants who'd shaped her reign. Liam, a young boy in the crowd that day, never forgot. Inspired by Evans' act, he joined the Navy, later serving on a ship named for the Queen. He carried a photo of the procession, clipped from a newspaper, as a reminder that duty is personal, not just ceremonial. His own salute, years later, at a naval ceremony, echoed Evans' crisp, heartfelt, human. This story, born from a spark of emotion, asks us to weigh the balance of rules and compassion. When have we clung to protocol at the cost of humanity? When have we dared to break a rule for a greater good? The Royal Guard, standing through centuries, reminds us that duty isn't just in the stance. It's in the heart that chooses when to move. What would you have done in Evans' place? Could you have stepped out of line, risking all to keep a promise? Share your thoughts. For every uniform carries a story, every breach, a lesson, and every moment, a chance to honor what truly matters.